Here's your podcast script. China emerges as a relative winner from the Strait of Hormuz crisis. That's the headline from the New York Times, and it tells a story that's worth slowing down on. The war in Iran and the effective closure of the Strait of Hormuz have caused serious economic pain across much of the world: higher energy prices, supply chain chaos, inflation. But according to a new analysis from the Asia Group, a Washington-based consulting firm, one country has largely managed to dodge the worst of it: China. Here's the core of the finding. Asia as a whole is deeply exposed to this crisis. The region sources 80% of its oil and 90% of its natural gas through the Strait of Hormuz. So when that choke point gets disrupted, the ripple effects hit hard and fast. And it's not just energy. The war has also disrupted the flow of naphtha, used to make plastics and chemicals, helium, critical for semiconductor factories and MRI machines, and sulfur, needed to refine copper, nickel, and other minerals that go into electric vehicle batteries. These are not obscure inputs, they're foundational to modern manufacturing. But China, the analysis argues, has been able to absorb much of the shock in ways other countries simply can't. It has its own oil and gas reserves, it's built out massive clean energy capacity, and it used a combination of tools, export controls, subsidies, quotas on oil refineries, and a managed currency to cushion the blow. In May alone, China's oil imports were down more than 30% year over year, which actually freed up global supply for other buyers. Kurt Campbell, the Asia Group's chairman and a former U.S. Deputy Secretary of State, put it bluntly: it's hard not to come to the conclusion that China is a winner here. Meanwhile, the picture elsewhere in Asia is much grimmer. In India, rising prices for fertilizer, fuel, and food are fueling political opposition, and with more than 40% of the workforce in agriculture, a surge in fertilizer costs combined with a potentially weak monsoon season is a serious threat. Japan is already spending the equivalent of about half its defense budget on fuel subsidies, and shortages of aluminum and naphtha have forced Japanese automakers to cut production. In Southeast Asia, the strain is even more acute. The Philippines declared a national energy emergency. Indonesia's nickel producers have cut output because they can't get enough sulfuric acid. Tourism in Bali has dropped because airfares have climbed. And as those countries scramble, they're increasingly turning to China for solar panels, battery storage systems, and electric vehicles, industries China dominates. That demand is accelerating, and it's also reinforcing China's pitch to the rest of the world as a stable, reliable partner, a pitch that gets easier to make the more chaotic the global environment becomes. There's also a downstream effect worth noting for the United States. The Hormuz crisis has stressed the Asian supply chains that produce semiconductors, transformers, copper, and other materials used to build U.S. data centers. At a moment when America is racing to expand its AI infrastructure, that's not an insignificant vulnerability. As for how long this lasts, that's the open question. The Trump administration says it has a peace deal, and traffic in the Strait had been picking up. But Iran and the U.S. have since traded new attacks and threats, and even if a ceasefire holds, analysts expect the consequences to linger. Insurance costs for shippers will stay elevated, and companies will keep seeking longer, more expensive routes to avoid the risk. Campbell warned that countries like Japan and South Korea have largely burned through the reserves that buffered them so far. In his words, in many capacities, from jet fuel to a lot of diesel oils, we are basically almost running on empty. The Strait of Hormuz crisis is still unfolding, but its first clear economic verdict is already taking shape. Approximately 620 words reads to roughly 4 minutes at a comfortable pace.